Where Mr. Hyde is in our brain and how we can control him. The man in question, Mr. Edward Hyde, is a character from Robert Stevenson's famous novella, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Known to be lacking in empathy, morals, and decency, he later gives even more into his dark desires and murders a fellow gentleman on the street. He is described as devilish, criminal, disfigured, and all around evil. One of the characters in Stevenson's narrative speak of Hyde saying, "He is not easy to describe. There is something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarce know why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point." And Hyde, in his true evil form, does exist in real life. The most prevalent Hydes, or ones who gave in to their dark desires, are most famously serial killers such as Jack the Ripper, Harold Shipman, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Ted Bundy, where you have these figures such as the enigma of Victorian London, Jack the Ripper, who butchered many female Victorian women in the late 1800s, as well as the more recent Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed many victims, raped people both dead and alive, and ate many of the dismembered parts. Hyde as a whole character is not a serial killer, but rather one who gave in to his dark desires, one of them later being murder. And so, where is Hyde in ourselves? While most of us are not serial killers and do not likely show darker thoughts in public, we all experience a moment of time where we weigh the good and evil in ourselves. This takes place in the region called the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for judgment, impulse control, management of aggression, emotional regulation, self-regulation, planning, reasoning, and social skills. Disruption of this region has been shown to correlate with disorders such as autism, ADHD, and antisocial personality disorder, as well as other pathological tendencies.
Planning a party, switching tasks at a moment's notice, suppressing a laugh when one isn't appropriate. These all require the maestro of brain regions, the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex sits just behind the forehead. It orchestrates complex thought processes much like a maestro conducts a symphony. In the brains of autistic people, though, it doesn't communicate well with other parts of the brain, and it may have an unusual structure. That may be why autistic people often have trouble with making plans, thinking flexibly, or controlling their impulses. Drugs or talk therapy may help to improve the function of this brain area and even, eventually, ease some autism traits.
Dark impulses have also been known to be linked with what is now called the dark triad. The dark triad are three different kinds of personalities, all of which give in to their dark desires for their own benefit. They are psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. Here is a short clip further explaining the dark triad.
Hey Psych2Goers, welcome back to another Psych2Go video. Have you ever heard of the dark triad of personalities? Well, what is the dark triad and how was it discovered? So, the dark triad is three overlapping yet distinct personalities: subclinical narcissism, subclinical psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. By subclinical, we mean that someone might show the traits of a narcissist or psychopath, but they're not severe enough to be diagnosed as a disorder. In 2002, Delroy L. Palas and Kevin M. Williams at the University of British Columbia did a study on whether these three personalities were identical by comparing the three personality traits of the dark triad with three other psychological aspects. They found that the correlation patterns were very different and concluded that psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism were indeed distinct. So, what's the difference? Narcissists tend to have a large sense of self as they feel entitled and superior to those around them. Machiavellianism, on the other hand, tends to be more manipulative and selfish, and psychopaths are more insensitive as they lack empathy for others and act without thinking. They are all associated with varying degrees of deception, questionable morals, and self-interest, but what they do have in common is disagreeableness. It's also thought that there is a relatively high genetic component to all three personality traits. Interestingly, psychopathy and Machiavellianism are more closely related to each other than narcissism, possibly because narcissism is the only one that can grow from a feeling of insecurity.
There have been several prefrontal cortex studies which survey those with slight psychopathical tendencies. Over 2 structural MRI studies of successful psychopaths, or those who were able to hide their tendencies, show that the individuals had a higher density of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. The researchers say that their finding supports a model of psychopathy in which the successful psychopathic individuals develop inhibitory mechanisms to compensate for their antisocial tendencies. Overall, this means that a higher density of gray matter in those psychopathic individuals means better self-control. In conclusion, we all have Hyde in ourselves, serial killer or not. We all face inner dilemmas and inner demons that want us to do the unthinkable. Most people in this angel and devil conflict choose the right and moral thing, to be Mr. Jekyll, to be good, upright, and respectable. However, there are some individuals that choose the other path, to be Hyde, and they are infamously written in the history books for it. Hyde is in all of us, and it is up to our brains, our prefrontal cortex, to decide which to be, Jekyll or Hyde.